Okay, so I just got back from vacation, and I also got myself sick, so I probably wasn't going to make a video this week. But then Tim Sweeney said one of the dumbest things I'd ever heard, and I just gotta talk about it for a hot minute. For those of you that may not know for some reason, Tim Sweeney is, of course, the CEO of Epic Games, aka the company that runs programs like, of course, the Epic Games launcher, the failed competitor to Steam, the Unreal Engine, the actually legitimately good engine, though the Unreal 6 is making me skeptical with the direction it's going, and then, of course, owner of popular games such as Fortnite. And what he said was in response to the shaky video game economy as of late and all of the struggles that various games have been running into over the past few years, and also a lot of the time before that, that the only hope, the only hope for new games is to connect to the economies of other games. To be successful, you must connect your game economies. And oh my god, it's not just that it's dumb in both a way that should be blatantly obvious if you're a game developer, and it's also dumb in a way that can only make sense if you happen to already own one of the most popular games of all time. Now, to start off on a somewhat positive note, there is a kernel of at least logic behind what they're trying to say here. The core premise that I believe they're going for is that a lot of these really big games that are already popular, like Fortnite, but also, lots of other popular multiplayer games, whether you're talking about MMOs like FF14 or whatever, they have a lot of investment in their economies. Players that have played games like Fortnite or FF14 or Helldivers 2 or whatever, they have spent not only like hundreds, if not thousands of hours of gameplay in them, but they also may have spent hundreds of dollars on in-game cosmetics or taunts or animations and all that kind of stuff, For like a lot of these games' business models are based around this kind of thing. And as a result, when you have somebody who has spent all of that time and money investing in one game, it becomes difficult to convince them to play any other game. It is one of those instances where, if I've spent $1,000 on Fortnite, then why am I going to play some other battle royale? Because I've already, I can't use all my cool skins and stuff that I bought, so I'm just going to keep playing Fortnite. Whereas by Tim Sweeney's logic, if I could use those skins in other games, like PUBG or whatever, then maybe I would be willing to buy and play those games to give them a shot, so that I'm not trapped by my own investment. That's like the logic that he's going with here. And if you don't think about it for any longer than what I just described it as, it kind of makes sense. But if you actually think about like the logistics of how that would work, it kind of immediately falls apart. See, the funniest thing about this idea is that if Tim Sweeney thinks this is the only way forward, I have some bad news for him, because this was literally already attempted at a pretty massive scale back in 2021 and 2022. Because if you remember, during the very short-lived NFT craze, this was literally the main selling point of the dozens, if not hundreds, of random NFT games that tried to get made and released on this exact same premise. The whole idea of using NFTs in these games was meant to be that, like, oh, you could get a gun in Tarkov, and then if you extract with it, you could take it into like PUBG and then use it in that game, and then you could take a skin you bought in Fortnite and put it in Super Smash Brothers or whatever. Like that was literally the premise of these NFT games. And of course, the ironic thing about that is that NFTs were not at all necessary if developers wanted to pull this off. The blockchain didn't need to be involved whatsoever in order to make that idea work. But that also shows that the idea itself is so fundamentally flawed that it was never going to work in the first place. Because the core issue with this kind of idea is that it forces a one-sided relationship on the part of the developers of the two games that you're trying to have interact with each other. You see, it's when you're talking about, you know, this concept of importing a game's asset rather from one game to another. It's not like copying a file over where you just hit Control-C on a skin in Fortnite and then you paste it right into PUBG and then it works. That's not how any of this works. It would take, like, for one, it matters, like, what engines are the games using. Like, you're not going to be able to just transfer over an asset from the Unreal Engine over into Unity and expect it to work flawlessly. Those are completely different systems. Not to mention, even if it's within the same engine, the games are going to have different kinds of file systems, different kinds of model data that they're going to be using for their models, different kinds of animation software. And not to mention, like, okay, the skin might work on the character models that were designed for one game, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for the character models for another game. Like, what if you're playing a game where you're playing as a bunch of robots and it looks completely different than the humans from, like, so essentially, in order to make this work, you would need to have a team of developers actually put in, like, tons and tons of effort into actually implementing all of the skins from another game in the game that it's meant to work in. So, like, if I wanted to make a Battle Royale game today, and I wanted to follow Tim's idea of making it compatible with all of Fortnite's skins, and let's just say he gives me carte blanche to do it all, and I don't have to pay him anything to make it happen, you know, and I'm just allowed to have all of Fortnite skins work in my game. Well, that means I need to go through what is probably thousands and thousands of Fortnite skins at this point, and individually make sure that all of those assets are able to function in my game at zero direct benefit to myself. Like, that is a ton of effort that I'm putting in. And then keep in mind, think about this logistically. Those skins are purchased in Fortnite. They're not being purchased in my game. So I'm putting in all of this effort to implement all of these skins in my game so that people can spend money in a different game and then use those assets in my game. This is what I mean when I say that this concept inherently creates a very one-sided relationship, because everybody would want to be the game where people are buying the assets, because that's the game that's actually making money, and nobody would want to be the game that has to implement all of the assets from another game, because again, you're doing all of this so that people cannot buy skins in your game. And naturally, there's not really any incentive for the street to go both ways. Like, okay, maybe you could make an argument that look, Fortnite is so popular that implementing the skins from that game would, like, I guess, give me exposure, and so I'm effectively being paid in exposure by implementing Fortnite skins in my game, and thus people might be incentivized to give my game a bit more of a look, so that they're, you know, willing to do that. But in return, Fortnite doesn't really have any incentive to implement my skins back into their game. Because again, they're already, like, the kings of the market. They already have the market dominance and tons of players and making tons and tons of money. So, like, they don't need the exposure from a random no-name brand new title that might not even last for more than a few months. So, you know, why would players, like, want to buy skins in my game if they could buy a skin in Fortnite and use it in both games? Like, in fact, if anything, then Fortnite could start to outcompete me because they have way more resources, and so they could pump out more skins that then would have to be implemented in my game that I'm not making any money from in order to disincentivize people from even buying skins in my game because they're just able to have, like, it just is a completely nonsensical idea. The only way that this would actually benefit, like, new smaller games and whatnot is if Fortnite was the one that took the steps to implement all of the skins and whatnot from those other games. If the street actually went that way, and instead of using Fortnite skins in other games, it was, oh, do you want this Fortnite skin? Well, the only way to get it is to buy this one other random smaller game. That would actually, I guess, be a real incentive for some people. You know, even if you are a diehard Fortnite player, like, if you want that skin and the only way to do it is by giving another game money, then that would actually help out those smaller games. But like I said, this isn't the way that Sweeny talks about the issue. He talks about it from the perspective of, well, all of these people are already so invested in Fortnite that they want to use their Fortnite skins and everything. So, like, he's obviously alluding to the idea that, like, oh, other games should clearly be the ones implementing our skins so that people can keep giving us money to use our skins in their game. So it's very obvious to me that this purely comes from a perspective of total greed. Like, that this only makes sense in Sweeney's head, again, because he owns Fortnite. If this was from the perspective of anybody who was running a smaller game that was trying to compete with Fortnite, then yeah, it wouldn't this obviously would not work. But by all means, if Tim Sweeny wants to prove me wrong, then do it. Go start implementing skins that you can only get by purchasing assets in other games, and then maybe it'll actually make sense. You know, if you actually start implementing tons of skins like that, then maybe you can prove me wrong. Hell, maybe you can implement a skin that you can only get by subscribing to this YouTube channel. You know, hey, there's an idea. Hit me up if you wanna talk about that. You know, maybe that'd work. Also, it just like occurred to me, this isn't even taking into account like licensing issues. Like, even if Epic gave me permission to implement all of the skins from Fortnite into my game to somehow attempt this in some way, that what about like the Superman and like Wolverine skins and whatnot, like all of these characters that are clearly owned by like Disney and Warner Brothers and all these different companies. Like, you would have these contracts, you can't just transfer them over like that. Like you would have to renegotiate like dozens and dozens of these, you know, various licenses in order to make there's so, like, you can't have any copyrighted content could possibly... Like, none of that would work with this idea whatsoever. And that's, like, Fortnite's entire business model, practically. Not to mention that this also ignores the problem of platforms and, like, platform fees. Because, like, even when we're talking about one game, like, the same game on different platforms... Like, if there's, like, a shooter that's out on both PC, but also, like, Switch and PS5 and Xbox, most of these games don't let you transfer, like, cosmetics and stuff between different platforms, even if they have, like, a shared account, because every purchase on those platforms has a cut that is sent to the platform holder. You know, that standard, like, 30% rate on games also applies to microtransactions and whatnot. So, like, whenever you buy a skin on PS5, whether that game was made by Sony or not, part of that money is going to Sony. So you can bet your ass that they're not going to be happy if the game implements a system where you can buy skins on another platform and then use it on Sony's platform without giving Sony any money. And again, this is all talking about one multi-platform game. Now imagine if we're talking about the idea of, like, Sony releasing a game that they themselves made and is exclusive to their platform, but then Tim Sweeny wants you to be able to buy a Fortnite skin on Epic's store so that you can use it in that game without having to give Sony money. Like, this is also just yet another way to avoid paying other platformers or platforms fees, just like how they tried to sue Apple over the same thing a few years ago. But yeah, this is. I think I've rambled about this for long enough. I think you get the idea by now. It's a hilariously short-sighted and impractical idea. It would take way too much effort to implement all of these assets from a game that isn't even your own, just so that people can spend money in another person's game without any benefit to yourself, while also ignoring all of these other logistical problems like licensing and platform fees. And it's an idea that just cannot ever really work in practice. At best, maybe you could implement it between multiple games that are owned by the same developer or publisher, but like at that point they're already able to pool resources. Like, so many things that Epic has done are funded by the money that Fortnite makes. There's no need to implement skins between different games owned by Epic, because they can just already give each other money. You know, that's how Epic was able to afford to buy exclusivity rights to so many indie games back in the days, because they were using Fortnite money for it. They didn't need to implement, like, Fortnite skins into those games to make this work somehow. So it's just a complete non-idea from start to finish. But yeah, if you want my opinion on what the quote-unquote only hope for new games moving forward should be, maybe the answer is to just, like, not make a live service game that competes with Fortnite? You know? Like, honestly, at this point, live service games seem so poisoned that if you're planning on developing one, you're probably better off spending all of that money at a casino for what it's worth. With how many of these live service games just come out to immediately crash and burn on release. Like, yeah, if you get it right, you get to have a Final Fantasy XIV or Fortnite, but it comes at the expense of hundreds, if not thousands, of other imitators trying to make a similar game and immediately failing on release. Meanwhile, we've got games like Silksong and Mina the Hollower coming out for only $20 a pop, and they're still selling way more than enough needed to make back their profits with ease. So, like, I'm not about to say that, like, making a smaller indie game is, like, a guaranteed path to success, but, you know, maybe we don't need to be spending hundreds of millions of dollars just trying to make more and more, you know, live service slop for the furnace. Maybe focus on making, like, a smaller, less risky game. Like, we don't have to keep pushing the edge of graphical realism with every single new title. You can just make a game for, like, way less money. You know, when Hi-Fi Rush came out, that game had a way cheaper art style. And I don't think anybody criticized the visuals, because it looked great for what it was. Mina the Hollower looks like a literal Game Boy game, and it still looks amazing. Like, hell, I prefer, like, more, like, weird art styles like what Mina the Hollower is doing over most of these, like, realistic live shooter games any day of the week. And I mean, one of the biggest weaknesses of indie games, honestly, is really more just discovery. So, like, surely, if, like, a large developer combined the smaller development budget and ease of development of, like, an indie game with the ability to still buy, like, big marketing spots as a large developer, so that they have, like, actual, like, news and advertising and whatnot to get the game out there, I feel like that's a much safer path to success than trying to compete with Fortnite. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I guess, as always, I'm happy to continue the conversation in the comments down below. I'm sick. I don't really have the energy to go through more of this spiel. So if you like the video, make sure to give me a like and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this in the future. Don't get sick, it sucks. I don't like it. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.